welcome to the Momversation Club, the podcast born out of the idea that every mum needs a tribe. I'm Claire Strong.
And I'm Christina Streckmeyer. We're two moms just like you, navigating the chaotic, challenging, and often isolating world of motherhood.
Now, it's said that it takes a village to raise a child, but we want to know, where the F is that village?
It's a question that resonates with so many of us who find ourselves raising children, managing careers, and trying to maintain our own identities, often with a sense of isolation.
But we're here to remind you that you're not alone. The Momversation Club is your village, a place where you feel valued, appreciated, and understood.
We believe that by sharing our own experiences, successes, and struggles, that we can create a virtual village for all you amazing mamas out there.
So join us every week for an honest, raw, and relatable discussion about all aspects of motherhood, including the stuff you just can't talk about with anyone else.
So if you've ever asked yourself, where the F is that village? Well, you found your tribe. Let's get into it. Hey Claire, how are you today?
Hello, I am good. I'm loving today's dress, Christina. You look very pretty.
Thank you. For those who are listening and not watching, I have kind of a frilly, I guess, bohemian type top on.
Yeah, like puffy sleeves. They're really cute.
Yeah, it's really nice for the summer. I've been looking for some good throw on outfits because dresses are very sneaky that way where, people think you put a lot of effort into your appearance, but really you just threw a dress on.
Yeah, they're good like that.
They are
you don't
good
need
like
to give them a lot of thought, actually, do you? Especially like the maxi dresses, the long ones, because they're like covering everything up as well. I love them. I need
Totally.
to
throw on some earrings. It looks like you can go to an event, or you can you take the earrings off. You're in your house dress. Like it's a vibe. But
it's a vibe. And then you can even just not do much with your hair because you're going with this beachy boho kind of thing. Love it.
Yeah, I'll claim that. When my hair is all sideways, I'll be like, this is intentional. It's intentional.
Oh, I do the same. I'm going for a beachy look. No, I just haven't brushed my hair. It's not staled, and I've sprayed it with dry shampoo.
Yeah. But I've been enjoying shopping lately, and you know what I've noticed, Claire, is that I've been shopping a lot in the early morning, early morning, at Walmart. And in the morning,
3 a.m. or how early?
No, like 7:30 in the morning at Walmart, on a Saturday or something, or a Wednesday or whatever. And I've noticed that when you go in the morning on a weekday to Walmart, the cashiers are these old little ladies that are super nice, and everybody's all stocked up, and everybody's around if you have questions. Girl, I went to Walmart the other day at 7 at night. It was way different. The vibes were so different. It was you couldn't find anything or anyone. You couldn't, everything was locked up like Fort Knox, and no one was friendly. 0 stars. It was awful.
Really? Oh God.
So if you're going to go to Walmart, if that's your vibe, go in the morning is my tip for you.
Hey, listen, that leads us quite nicely into today's episode because I'm guessing that negative experience invoked quite a lot of anxiety within you, Christina, and that is actually what we're going to be talking about today. Not necessarily Walmart-induced anxiety, but anxiety in general.
Yeah. I was researching about anxiety this morning and yesterday, and it gave me anxiety, and I went, this is why we're doing this show. Because I know we are not alone in the fact that that has become a presence in our life. And as I was researching, I'm looking at anxiety because, there's the anxiety itself where it's people have anxiety, and what does that look like? And now that we've, come into a time of the world kind of talking about mental health a little bit more, we are more aware of it. But then there's anxiety as mothers, which is a whole different breed. And so
it is.
I want to talk about both today and chit chat a little bit about our experiences with anxiety, and hopefully share some relatability for our audience, and then maybe give some tips. But again, I have anxiety, you have anxiety, we all have anxiety. And so those tips are laced with a little bit of we're blindly and blind a little bit over here.
Lived experiences is what I would categorize this as.
Correct.
Where do you want to start with this? Because as you said, anxiety can take so many different forms.
So, I was thinking about people who are raising children right now and what
Hmm.
age group they might be and where, you sit down on the couch for the therapist and they're like, where did this all begin? Like where might
Yeah.
have some of our anxiety began, because I know that mental health is not a new thing. I'm sure our grandmothers had mental health issues, but
Hmm.
it seems like our generation is more anxious than other generations. And we're
Hmm.
talking about it a little bit more, which is nice. But I think you can also look at what the hell has happened to us over the
Yeah.
last, 25 years or so, and
Hmm.
how that's formed us as society members, mothers, as women, and what that looks like. So as I was looking into like, why am I the way I am? I thought about the millennial experience, because a lot of the women
Mm.
that
That's
are raising
interesting.
kids right now are of the millennial age group.
Yeah.
And so I forget the target ages, like where it ends and begins, but I know I'm a millennial. Claire, do you know if you're a millennial? Are you? I think you're a
Yeah, I
millennial.
think I'm just yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm kind of like
You're in
at
the
the
bracket.
start of, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's
Yeah,
quite a range actually, isn't it? So
it
the
is.
moms that are in this age range could be like me with teenagers, or they could even have older kids if they start when they're really young.
Yeah.
But then right down to mums who are just having babies, and obviously, there are mums that have babies like later on, like my age, your age,
Yeah.
although you're not as old as I am.
No, but
But
there's moms that are my age that are just beginning their motherhood
oh,
journey,
sure.
maybe have their first baby.
Yeah, and I know quite a few
Um,
moms who are just starting and they're in their 40s. So yeah, I mean,
yeah.
it doesn't necessarily your age doesn't necessarily dictate the age of your child, but yeah, so we're talking about that kind of span of time.
That bubble. Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think there's a couple things. So there's like world events that have happened in that timeline, but
yeah,
also there's culture. Um,
yeah.
we come from a generation that was raised by Gen X and also boomers, and the
Hmm.
generation that came before us, I don't know about you, Claire, but I kind of got the vibe of you can do it all. You just need to try harder.
Mm,
Hustle and grind, climb the ladder, keep on
mm,
pushing. There was a lot of
mm,
like multitask, suck it up, let's go, pull yourself up by the britches, kind of mentality being directed at me. I mean,
yeah.
did you feel that? I know we have different upbringings and different
Yes,
cultures. Was that in
I
your area?
think. Yeah, I think for me growing up, there was always this expectation. I don't know necessarily that it was explicitly said to me, but that it was certainly implied that I was expected to do better than my mum and dad.
Yeah,
It was just a natural progression. So we did better, they did better than their parents, better, financially, better career wise, and all of that. And so I was expected to do better than them. And so I had that pressure on myself from being, quite a young girl. I mean, probably middle school age, certainly high school age. I thought, oh God, I need to be, I've got to be a millionaire. I've got to be, because I was wanting to work in TV, I've got to be famous and I've got to be the best at everything that I can be. And if I'm not, then I'm a failure. It was like all or nothing.
absolutely.
And so that is definitely the atmosphere that I grew up in. And then when maybe I didn't make choices that my mom and dad wanted me to make, I think they definitely expressed their disappointment. And so that reinforced the negative kind of, oh, you're a failure because you haven't followed this path that we were hoping you were going to follow. And
Yeah.
oh dear, you don't own your own home yet. Well, when we were your age, we owned our own home, and
Yes.
so owns their own home, and so's got promoted, and so has this degree, and what's going on with you. And so I think for me there was a lot of expectation, but I think generally it was just assumed at that time that you were going to do better than your parents. You were expected to do better than your parents. And I think, unfortunately,
Yes.
for our generation, it goes back for me to the, 2008 financial crisis. I mean,
Mm.
that for me, because I was a young adult at that time, I was just going into journalism, and that really impacted like my situation very negatively. My husband at the time, he had his own business. He just started his own business, and it was in finance of all the things. And so his business folded. And so I feel that in my adult life, I've had a lot of knockbacks. It's just been knockback after knockback and financial struggle after
Yeah.
financial struggle. And because I chose to go into journalism, which, in hindsight, maybe if I, I would have chosen something
We
different
both
to
went
get
into
rich.
journalism like, wait a
I
second
mean,
here after we got out.
yeah, I was like, maybe, I should have kind of, really seen it for what it was a few years in and thought, this probably isn't going to get me rich and I'm probably going to be overworked and extremely stressed. Anyhow, I digress. But the point is, I just feel that,
Yeah.
life has been very hard for for me as an adult. And I think part of that has been to do with the fact that the expectations were so high and we've had, a string of bad luck as adults, that some of it's been out
Yeah.
of our control. Like I say, it
Well, and
starts all the way
then
back to the
the
financial crisis.
roadmap that you described earlier
Yeah,
is out of date. It's like following a
yeah,
map that has been before certain roads were invented or certain
yeah,
highways were there. You're like, this
yeah,
doesn't exist anymore, though.
yeah. Well, let's talk about, things like pensions.
Yeah.
My mum and dad have got pensions because that's how it works. I don't have a pension. I'm not able
Yeah.
to. I don't have the savings that I would have liked to have had at my age and stage, and so everything's been difficult. Pensions
Yeah.
are widely not a thing anymore. And so then what do? You try, okay, well, I need to try and get into property. Well, that's great, but look at the mortgage rates. How are you, so everything. And then
Exactly. It's just there's more and more obstacles
it,
as you get into
yeah,
it. And
it's
it's like,
compounded. One setback seems to be compounded by the next, by the next, by the next. And honestly, I feel that at my age and my stage right now in life, I'm having to relaunch my career and think outside the box in a way that honestly I never thought I'd have to do, because I got my degree, I have a master's degree in journalism, I work
yeah,
for the BBC. I mean, I was a very good journalist, and so I assumed that that would just be smooth sailing for me. But then you find out, well, there's actually no money in that game, and then you add
yeah,
all the different factors, and then you're kind of scrambling to relaunch yourself in a way that I don't think our parents ever had to do. And then the big one that we need to bring into this was COVID, because, in addition to everything we're talking about, the cost of living is astronomical. COVID came along, and that, in lots of
girl.
ways,
Yes.
just
Yeah.
threw us
Let's
into
back up a little bit
turmoil.
though, because there's
Yeah.
so much between financial collapse and COVID situation, which was a literal pandemic, like a literal
Well, it was. It
pandemic.
was, and actually, if you think
Oh
about it,
my
it was. Yeah,
gosh.
it totally
So
was.
like getting back to the timeline of like the moms who are momming right now, we've got
Yeah,
these financial setbacks of like this
yeah,
bill of goods that was sold to us where it's like go to college, get a good job, you'll be set, buy a home,
yeah.
like this is the American dream. But then
Mhm.
in between all of that, we've got anxiety inducing world events. There's
Mhm.
major there's a war, there's the
Mhm.
World Trade Center, September 11th, there's
Yeah,
natural
9/11.
disasters that have occurred. There's economic issues. There's social justice issues. And
Mhm.
then school shootings and like all of that, where like as a teen, you're going to school with anxiety about being worried about that. And then later on, as a parent, remembering how you felt and trying to also obstacle with that, like, and trying to wrestle with the entirety of that whole situation. So there's just so many things. And then you throw in this fun little thing called the internet, which
Mm.
is
Social
the
media.
cherry on
Yeah,
top of
yeah,
everything, where you have access to everything all the time whenever you want.
yeah.
And that can be really anxiety inducing in its own right, both as a mom and as a person. And then, yeah, a literal pandemic like rolled through in our lifetime and took over what, 3+ years of
Yeah,
our
it really
lives
did.
where, holy crap.
And I remember, yeah, totally. And I remember, I mean, thank God no one in our immediate circle died as a direct result of COVID. But, you know, for me, that meant that, I mean, I remember having a bit of a breakdown, honestly, when I realized the magnitude of what that meant for my personal situation, because that meant that I wasn't going to be able to see my family until that was over, because all my family are over in the UK. And so there was a travel ban. And
Yeah.
And actually, my granddad did die during COVID, and I couldn't go over to his funeral. I didn't see him for years before his death because I couldn't get over there. And so, from my point of view, it just made me feel really, really isolated. And then it had a real negative impact on my eldest daughter, who was still in elementary school at the time. But that impacted her going into middle school. She couldn't go to middle school initially because the schools weren't open. And so, like I say, it just seems to be one thing after another. And
Well,
so you
the
touched upon
anxiety
school
of being a
shootings.
mother when all
Yes,
of that
yes.
is going on was so, there was so many layers to it because I
Oh,
remember
crazy.
so much stress because there was the financial impact, there was the
Hmm.
travel ban, there was the fact
Hmm.
that you were trying to buy things because you weren't sure how bad this was going to be, and you go to the store and
Yeah.
there things would be gone. Um, it
Hmm.
was terrible, and then you're worried. You're looking at every single person in your life as this possible threat to your
Mm.
family,
Hmm.
and it makes you further and further isolate from people. Not only are you like mentally isolating from like all of this, but then also like physically isolating in your home. And then all of the
Hmm.
problems that might be happening, and all of the chaos of your family is like enclosed in this tiny little space. And we were, as moms, basically forced into this like grow 3 or 4 extra arms because you're now you're not only a
Yeah, now,
homemaker, but you're the
yeah.
maid, you're the teacher, you're the nurse, you're the
Hmm.
everything. You cannot leave your house and nothing that comes into your house is safe. Like that's how I felt during that period of time.
Yeah, it was kind of a feeling of being under siege. It was extremely stress provoking. The other thing is, because I think this is just a innate feeling that we have as moms, we have to protect our kids. And so that what that looked like during the pandemic, not just in a physical sense, you don't want to scare them. And so,
Yes.
you may be scared, but you don't want them to pick up on your fear, because you need to be telling them that everything's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. Everyone's good. We're going to be back to normal at some point. And in the meantime, and you've got to have that upbeat, in what that's how I felt anyway. This upbeat outlook, and meanwhile, you're freaking out, thinking, I don't know how this is going to end. I don't have any answers. I'm scared, but I can't, portray that to my kids, because that's going to make them anxious. And so it's a we've had a lot as moms. We've had a lot to deal
We've
with,
had a
and
lot.
a lot of it has been out of our control. The only thing I guess we've been able to control is our reaction to these events. But
Yeah.
it's a really it's a big one. I tell you who I would love to get on here as a guest. A friend of mine called Laura Morton. She's a New York Times best-selling author, and she also directed the documentary Anxious Nation. And
Mm.
if you haven't seen it, see it. We'll link to the film in the notes. But that is basically what that documentary is about. It's focusing on
Yeah.
the anxiety epidemic that is affecting our kids, particularly teens and young adults. But all these things play a part. You mentioned school shootings earlier. Now, in the
Yeah.
UK, that was never something I had to worry about. We'd hear about it on the news. A terrible shooting in America had happened, and we'd all be shocked. But we never had to live through that. There was one
I
school shooting once in Scotland back in the 90s, I believe. And that's been the first and only school shooting, thank God. So we
Claire,
don't. That
it's
wasn't something I grew up with.
it's been such a presence in my life as an adult
Mm.
and as a teen. When I grew up, Columbine happened, which is a big school
Hmm.
shooting here. I think it was 99 or something. And
Yeah,
there was a
yeah.
giant assembly, and we watched a documentary about it. And I remember we started doing school drills, and we started
Mm.
talking about what we would do. And I was like, well, what happens if I'm going to the bathroom? And they're like, well, you're going to hide in a stall. Like it was just like this anxiety of like, will it be us next? And that wasn't even as prevalent as it is now. I was looking at statistics, and there is Everytown, which is an advocacy group for,
Yep.
it's an advocacy group that talks about this kind of stuff. And they said
Mhm.
between the 2015-2016 school year, they clocked that 95% of American public schools drilled their students for lockdown. And I remember encountering it for the first time as a mother with Stella, because I remember myself going through lockdown drills. And I was like,
Mm.
listen, if someone starts shooting your school and I'm on the PE ground, I'm gone. Because I am fat, I'm 5'2". Like, I'm not gonna run
Oh,
fast. Like, this is not gonna be a good situation for me. But as a student, I was able to be like, okay, it's just me. It's just me. I can worry about me. Then my daughter started going through those drills. And it was
mm.
really scary, especially because my daughter is in a special needs class and they're taught to barricade and be silent.
Yeah.
And that is nearly impossible for that classroom. Like, there's just no
Mm.
way that they would be able to be silent in that
Mhm.
class. And so it was terrifying. I was like, God, I hope that never happens, because there will be no way for that person to hide. Like, there will be no way that that classroom is safe for them. And even if they were quiet. We've had so many lockdown drills that didn't matter. It didn't matter if they were doing all the right stuff. It still happens. And so it's terrifying as someone going through those drills and growing up. But then when you go to make that next step of having kids and then watching
Mm.
your preschooler who's 3 years old get barricaded in a closet
Mm.
with other 3-year-olds and be told to shh, there's a bad man outside. That's next level. Your anxiety is like through the roof. And I just talking about it makes me want to like go grab my kid. It's scary.
Yeah, it does. It's very anxiety producing. And because I
Yeah.
didn't grow up in that, when I moved over here 6 years ago with my girls, I was just horrified to learn that that's just a staple part of schooling here. You go
Yeah.
through active shooter drills, and it's so sad, and it's just. I mean, if you were to think about it, you wouldn't let your kids go to school. You wouldn't let them go anywhere. I mean, we can't obviously go to that extreme either, but
No.
there's just so many. I guess the point is, and that is an exceptionally, um, you know, on a level of 1 to 10, that's a 10 anxiety producing issue. Obviously, I don't
Yeah.
think there's anything more serious than gun violence in this country, especially as it relates to children. But that aside, there's so many. I mean, everywhere you turn, there are things that are elevating our anxiety, that are causing us as moms to. We're anxious about, how that's going to impact our kids. How
Oh,
is that going
100%.
to? It's
Am I
just,
doing it good enough? Am I
yeah,
working hard enough? Is what I'm doing
yeah,
right now going to affect them? Are they going to be in therapy because of the way I'm parenting right now? Like,
totally,
there's all these thoughts as a
yeah,
mom, and then you layer in the life experience. And I think if you're as a person right now, if you don't have anxiety, like, are you even awake? Are you like paying attention? But I was
yeah,
looking into this, and something that I saw, I was reading a parenting magazine article,
mhm,
and there was a psychologist that said, anxiety is present all the time for most people. Like,
mm,
people are kind of just anxious. It's a
mhm,
general feeling in today's world to be anxious, and it's a
mhm.
normal feeling. But anxiety is a
Okay,
problem when it overshoots reality. And
okay,
so, when you start going into worst case scenarios, when it starts impacting you in a major way in your life, that's when you need to
mm,
start seeking help and looking into that. And so, I did research kind of what that looks like for moms. Like, what could it look like? And then I do want to share a little bit about my own anxiety and how that creeped up. But for moms, here's just a
yeah,
small list, but it's not limited. So if it, it could be other things,
mhm,
but persistent worry
mhm,
about your child's well-being that overtakes you.
mhm, mhm,
Constantly questioning if you're a good mom. That's a big one.
mm,
Chronic sleep issues and issues with appetite, eating, either not eating enough, eating too much, like, it could be either way.
mhm,
Feeling constantly judged or mom shamed and having feelings about that. Persistent feelings of guilt, sadness, fear, constantly Googling things. Girl,
mm. Yeah, yeah.
that is
We're
a
all
big
related to that, I'm
one.
sure.
That is like
Yeah.
I doom scroll a lot. Avoiding social situations is a big key that you might be suffering from anxiety, not feeling good enough, and then just like feeling overwhelmed, but not the normal like base level of mom overwhelm, but maybe like an
Mm,
overwhelm that causes you to kind of like basically misfire. Like, you're just like, "Ooh, I can't even go do anything because I'm so overwhelmed." And so that's a very small, like, little list, but there's like so many other things. Like, I learned so much about anxiety after the birth of my daughter. But before I get into that, when you're listening to that list, Claire, I mean, can
mhm.
you relate to a lot of that?
Yeah, and you know the one that was interesting when I was listening to you, the one about avoiding social situations. Now, I'm actually a very social person, but when I was just thinking about that for a second, and I do put myself, and I think we're all guilty of this, under a lot of pressure. And, maybe I don't look as good as I would like, or there's something going on, or I've not achieved as much as I needed to have achieved. So by going to that social situation, I'm going to reveal all these flaws about myself. They're going to say, wow, she's not looking her best. Oh, she looks tired. Oh, she looks this. And she's not doing this. And oh, she's not got this job and looks like and that, again, I hadn't realized, but when I was just listening to you, relay that list,
Yeah.
that is anxiety right there, because it's the worst case scenario. I'm telling myself, oh, they're going to think this about you. I'm sure they're probably not thinking anything because they're too busy dealing with their own anxiety.
Exactly. Like
um,
you're like, I've got enough. I can't take on Claire's.
yeah, exactly. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is I think sometimes we don't realize what anxiety is actually looking like in our daily lives. But anxiety is causing a lot of our reactions, and a lot of the way we think is being clouded by this underlying anxiety. So give me an example of, I don't know, a recent situation where your anxiety has overtaken you.
Yeah. So I definitely want to talk a little bit about like postpartum anxiety in a little bit, but
Hmm.
current level right now, like my current anxiety situation,
Hmm.
I would say when I was on vacation recently, it caused me so much anxiety. It was almost debilitating to not be directly touching my children. We were
Oh.
at a very safe resort, very much like you cannot go in and out without like going through a whole kerfluffle. It was enclosed. People were everywhere. My family was with me. We were all watching the kids, but something in me was like, if I don't keep my eye immediately on this kid, something could happen. Like
Mm,
she could drown. She could be taken by someone. What if she hurts herself and I don't notice right away? Like there was just all these feelings of like, if I'm not the one to watch this, something horrible is going to happen. And
mm,
that's a level of anxiety that I navigate kind of ongoingly, but it gets really heightened in situations where my control's kind of taken away, where I'm not
right.
in my environment or a comfortable environment.
Yes.
It gets really heightened. What about you? Like, what's something that brings anxiety to you these days?
That's a good question. I don't know that there's any one thing, but I think sometimes my reaction, I overreact to situations, and I've just assumed that's just me. Maybe I'm not very emotionally mature. Maybe I'm just a bit dramatic. That's what I've put it down to. Because, anyone
Well,
that knows me well would probably say, yeah, Claire's pretty dramatic. And I am. I'll own it. I'm dramatic.
but I
So
will
maybe,
challenge that because I think that that is something we also tell ourselves as I'm being over dramatic or I'm being overprotective. And
yes, overreacting. Hmm.
maybe sometimes, but maybe not always. And
Mm,
so, not classifying yourself as an always, not every situation's the same. Like you aren't always dramatic. Maybe you can be sometimes on certain topics,
hmm.
but not always dramatic. Like sometimes your worries or your fears or your thoughts are valid.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, just a recent example I can give you. This by far not the biggest example, just one that's happened recently. So my eldest daughter's been going through her exams at school, and I was asking her what exams she had that week, and she reeled them off, but I didn't think that sounded very many, and so I said, "Are you sure?" And she was like, "Yes, mum." And so, but I felt anxious about it, so I double checked the exam schedule, and I didn't, instead of taking a word for it. I mean, this is probably not the best example, but it's just one that popped into my mind. But the interesting thing is my youngest daughter called me out on it. She said afterwards, she said, "Mum," she was like, "You really overreacted there. You just needed to have handled it really calmly. Instead, I was, well, are you sure this is all? Are you sure? Well, what if you turn up tomorrow at that time, you're going to miss an exam?" And, you know,
So your
so again,
stress is like bringing anxiety
yes,
to your children.
yes, yes.
Oh,
And
that
so that
happens
is
so
an
much.
example.
Yes.
Another
Yeah.
one that I've just thought of, again, probably not the best, but something that definitely I think is anxiety based. When my girls argue with each other, and I know their triggers, I know, the biggest trigger in my house, and if you've got teen girls, I'm sure you'll appreciate this one. If they take each other's stuff without asking, if they use each other's clothes, God, it's like World War III. It's ridiculous. Um, and so if I can see a situation that if I can see a trigger, I try and like eliminate it because I can't be bothered with dealing with it. That's what it is. It's too
Yeah.
stressful. If they're screaming, they're slamming doors, then it's like, Mom, you never do anything, and you should ground her. And then the whole thing's just, it's too stressful.
Well, and
So that
you're
invokes my
anticipating the fight that's going to happen because you know
yes.
their patterns, which is again like yes, that could be some anxiety, but it's also intuition and there's other stuff. I
Mm,
think being a mom is just living in a state of anxiety and anticipation. Like it's literally in our programming to make sure our children, stay alive. And then as they grow, I feel like that doesn't really stop. Like you just continue
mm,
onward in different ways. But like I said earlier, like anxiety is something that you can live with and function with, and it's something that
mm,
most people have on their plate. The problem is when it becomes like a big giant piece of your life
mm,
and you become so fixated on that anxiety that you're not able to function in your everyday life. And so
mhm,
I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like for some people, for myself.
mm,
Um, because I don't think I would have qualified. I would have said I was an anxious person, even though, as we're talking, like all this anxiety has always existed. I didn't notice it until after the birth of my daughter, Rennie, who's a toddler right now. Um, I started having anxiety in my pregnancy with her. And I've come to find out that, according to Postpartum Support International, 25 to 35% of postpartum anxiety can be pinpointed to being beginning in pregnancy. So if you're someone who's facing a lot of anxiety in pregnancy, you may want to be on the lookout for postpartum anxiety, which is like right up there with postpartum depression. They're kind of like
mm.
they're a sister situation. Like they sometimes go together, sometimes they're separate, but they have very similar presentations.
So that's
So
interesting because
yeah,
I'd never heard of postpartum anxiety, but I've obviously heard of postpartum depression. So this is
yeah.
separate to that.
It's separate, but they often come
Mhm.
together. But it
Okay.
could be that you
Okay.
just have the anxiety and not the depression because
Right.
postpartum depression can look so different, but it's usually a feeling of hopelessness, of unworthiness,
Mhm.
of feeling like this dark cloud over you, which
Yeah.
I have experienced, but the anxiety symptoms can look like other things. Um,
Mm.
But it does sometimes start like if you feel depressed or anxiety filled in your pregnancy, you want to let your like doctor or your midwife know because you're more susceptible to having that postpartum. And we've talked about it, but the postpartum period, you don't really see a doctor. You get
Yeah.
swallowed by motherhood for those first 6 weeks until someone goes, "Oh, you're good for sex." Like, like you don't have
Oh,
anybody in the in between. And
oh
so,
God. So
yeah,
true.
I want to talk about what that looked like for me. So again, I wouldn't have
Mhm.
categorized myself as someone who was anxious. I would have categorized myself as an overachiever, as someone who gets shit done, as a goal getter,
Mm.
hustle culture,
Ambitious.
ambitious. There
Yeah.
we go.
Yeah.
And then, I had my first daughter and she had her special needs and I felt very like advocacy driven. But I wouldn't qualify it as anxiety. And so I started getting it when I was pregnant
Mm.
and it showed up in like Googling. I was Googling a lot of things of what I should be feeling, how I should be doing in this certain stage of pregnancy, what's healthy, what isn't, what are signs of miscarriage, going on that situation.
Mm.
And then the internet noticed I was doing that and started putting advertisements in front of me about it. And then
Mm.
started putting my TikTok algorithm as infertility issue TikTok or child loss or infant loss TikTok. So I was starting to
Oh,
see all of these
wow.
horrible stories, which was creating more and more anxiety. Like
Of course.
my phone, who like is supposed to be my resource, was like a doom portal of like all the stuff that could go wrong. So I was, and then I also was dealing with a lot of like life stuff. Like my father had passed during my pregnancy. There was a lot of stuff going
Hmm.
on. Um, so I had the baby, and then I knew to look for signs of postpartum depression, but I didn't know what anxiety looked like. And so here are just a few signs of postpartum anxiety. And maybe if you're listening,
Okay.
you might be like, I totally was like that right after the baby. Or maybe you're
Yeah, let's
pregnant or
listen
you're
to
thinking
them.
about another one. Like maybe keep an eye on these for these things. So, one of the biggest things is postpartum rage, like irritability, like major
Mm.
irritability. We're all tired, okay? Like when you have a baby, like you're not getting much sleep, you're becoming a new version of yourself, you're trying to care for this person. But I had a level of rage where I could have stabbed someone. Like I was
Really?
always heightened. And it was just like this feeling of always being on edge. Like always everything was like this heightened amount of rage.
Mm.
And I would take it out on different people in my life. I would be really upset. I also felt myself getting upset with the baby, which was really
Oh,
scary
wow.
for me because that kind of scares you as someone, you're caring for this person that you love, and all of a sudden you're getting angry at this little person. It was scary. And it wasn't like this feeling of like wanting to hurt the baby. It was like, gosh, everything was not like this before you came about. Like, I'm so rageful right now. Um, which can lead to conflicts with other people in your life. Also, things like feeling jittery, shaky, dizzy, like out of sorts. The big one is intrusive thoughts. And as I have been becoming more and more aware of postpartum anxiety, I've seen more and more women talk about this, but there is this intrusive thought situation that comes in with postpartum anxiety that it's not just a thought, it's like you live the whole experience in your head. Let me give you guys an example.
Yeah, please
um
do. I hadn't heard of this.
so I would have thoughts like if I'm driving with the baby, I would be
Hmm.
like, what if, because we're like, near a body of water, what if I were to accidentally turn this car into that water and I couldn't get her out of the car seat and all of the water filled into this car and I couldn't break the window open and we all died? And it wasn't that I just thought that, it's like I would go through it like very visually with the entire situation. And,
Wow, that is intrusive.
or
That's
even
really
little stuff.
traumatic, actually, Christina. That's really traumatic to be going through that.
It's very common, like with postpartum
Oh,
anxiety, to have thoughts like this. What if the baby suffocates in their sleep? And you see a mom, waking up every few seconds to check their like breathing and check the monitor and make sure that they're okay. We had one of those little owlet sock thingies that you put on where you can check the heart rate while they're sleeping. And I would pull up my little monitor and be like, is she still breathing? Like it was a lot of that, like intrusive thoughts of like, what if this happens and I can't stop it from happening? And it's not just that thought, it's like literally like seeing it in your head at like it's a movie, like you're watching it happen.
God.
And it got worse at night. I feel like a lot of women have said that where you get closer and closer to it being dark and then all of a sudden like your anxiety sets in and you're like it's going to be this whole evening where she may not sleep and I'm going to have these thoughts and I'm going to need to feed her every 2 hours and I'm not going to sleep. And it's just like this whole thing. So that's like a really big one. So and it'll scare you and it scares you to the point where you don't want to share that with anyone.
Yeah, I can see that. So I was going to ask you this. What did you do then? How did you work through that?
Me and Alex had a really good conversation because he could tell that I was really off. And
Right.
I was a lot of these things, like just to kind of finish the list, like compulsively checking on your baby multiple times a night, flashback of nightmares, traumatic birth stuff, heart palpitations, like heart rate stuff. He saw that I was off, and thankfully he was a really attentive partner, and he was like started, he was getting up with me in the night feedings, and he was checking on me, and he was making sure I was okay. And there was just a night where I was like, I've got to share this intrusive thought, and I'm not going to share it on here because it was just so scary. But I said, this is an intrusive thought I'm having right now. I need you to take her. Like, I need you to take her and I
Oh,
need to go sleep. Like,
wow.
I need to just take some sleep, give her
Hmm.
formula, whatever. Like, I need to go to bed because I need to go see a doctor tomorrow. Like, we're in a situation where we're now needing to, like, really get some help. And thank God he listened and I felt safe enough to tell him that and like to take that break, because I know so many women don't have that support and they don't have that person that they can share with, or maybe they feel so scared of their own thoughts they don't share them with anybody else. So like my anxiety had gotten to a level where it was no longer okay for me to just navigate it myself. I couldn't just, grin and bear it or use talk therapy or do any of these things that I have the tools for. I now needed to go seek out some more tools. And I'm so glad I did that because it helped me so much.
Well, I mean, you need to take some credit for that, Christina, because you were self-aware enough to A, notice that this was something like terribly wrong that you didn't want to live with, and B, you overcame any potential bad reaction from your husband because you felt it was that necessary to share that with someone. So you definitely need to take a lot of the credit there. Okay, so you went to
Yeah.
the doctor, and then what happened?
Yeah. So I went to the doctor and I remember sitting in that room and I was like, I'm sure this is nothing, but I was just like, and then I just exploded all of this on her. I was like, I'm feeling like I'm out of sorts. I'm mad at everybody all the time. I'm crying constantly. And I had a combination of postpartum anxiety and depression. Like I was diagnosed with that, but most of it was anxiety. Like most of
Mm.
it was anxiety. And so I talked to her about it and she was really wonderful. It was the first time I'd ever gone to a general practitioner in like a long time. She's first time meeting me. And thank God I
Mm.
got a good one. And she just like sat down with me and was like, this is something that I'm glad you came here for. And we're going to get you some help. And like, let's talk about some options and see what might work for you and like what you feel comfortable with. And I ended up deciding to start a medication that was supposed to help with the postpartum anxiety. And it was a very small dose just to kind of see what that might do. And then, there was like, okay, well, we'll start it, but it doesn't take effect for maybe a few weeks. We'll see how it goes. We'll kind of play it by ear. And I'll tell you what, it's still here. Like I still have anxiety, but it's not at the level it was. Like when I took that medication, the first few weeks I didn't really see that much of a change, but then all of a sudden it was like all these noises that were happening just stopped and I could
Wow.
think clearly. And if I had an irrational thought, I could work through it and be like, that's unlikely, Christina. Like if I'm driving now, like I'm not a completely gone from it. Like I definitely own like a life vac and like a car break window thing and I Amazon stuff that's like safety purposes, but it's not overtaking me where I have to like pull over and stop. I'm like, Christina, that's an intrusive thought. Like maybe we don't like go down that road. Like I'm at a
That's
level where I can talk to
amazing.
myself.
Wow. So do you feel like you've taken control back? Do you feel like you are in control now when these
Yeah.
invasive or intrusive thoughts begin to start creeping in? You are actually able to take control back and say, no, thank you, not today.
Yeah, yeah. For the most part, like I can take control and I think it helps that I have a really supportive partner who can see where I'm coming from with that anxiety. It's hard in situations where I'm not in my space, like I mentioned the vacation stuff. Other people around me don't understand my anxiety and they feel as if I'm overreacting or I'm being overprotective, but they don't understand that like that is all encompassing in that situation. Like I literally cannot function without knowing exactly where she's at. um and it's something I'm navigating and working on because I don't think that that's going to serve us. It's like you talked about earlier where it's like my stress is causing my kid anxiety. I don't want my kids to grow up with a mom that's so anxious they can't do anything. Like I want them to have the freedom to do that stuff, but having a partner who sees me and validates some of my stuff, because sometimes I am being a little overprotective or my anxiety is getting the best of me, but other times I'm asking for a very, something that's perfectly understandable. Like I'm asking for something that's so doable and something that
Mm.
makes a lot of sense. So feeling heard is like a big one as you're like navigating this alongside someone. If you have a friend or something, that's a big, big one. But medication is something I never thought I would utilize, and it has transformed the way I navigate this. And I'm on such a low dosage. I think that it just was enough to kind of get me through, and I still take it to this day, like almost 2 years postpartum, because it just helps. It helps a lot with everything going on.
Christina, do you mind sharing the name of your medication? Because if it's working for
Yeah.
you,
Well, there's a
it
lot of
could
different
really work for
kinds.
other people. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of different kinds. I cannot remember the name of it, but I started a medication at first that was not
Mhm.
appropriate for me.
Okay.
And then we switched over to Lexapro, which is what I currently take. And that's an anti-anxiety medication. It helps with postpartum anxiety, depression, that kind of stuff. And I take a very small dosage of like 10 milligrams a day. It's really something super easy. I throw it in my little vitamins case. And it helps me just kind of navigate things a little bit better. That the reason I started that one is because my midwife had said if you want to have more kids, this one's safe to breastfeed with. Obviously, consult your own doctor if it's something you're considering, but like that's why I chose what I chose. But there's a lot of
Hmm.
other like medications out there that are what they call SSRIs. I forget what it stands for. It's like serotonin boosters, basically. It helps you kind of navigate your levels because for whatever reason, like you're having trouble with that. But
So I
yeah.
guess just to kind of recap, because we could this conversation is so
Oh, yeah.
varied. We are going to be coming back to this time and time again, and maybe focusing on different
Well,
areas. But
ways to cope, right? Like
yeah,
let's just
that's what
finish out.
I think would be really really helpful. What if someone's listening to this and they're like, "My God, I have all of these signs," or
Yeah.
yeah, I can totally relate to that. What can people do? What can mums do?
Well, we always suggest therapy. Like, I think doctors' therapy, like talking to a professional is great. Having people in your life who understand and validate you and can listen when things are you're having a hard time. If you're in a postpartum situation, making sure that you have someone you trust that you can get the help from. But the big thing for me was really analyzing what I was taking in and making edits. So I found out on TikTok that you can not push like I unlike this, like I do not like this kind of content, not interested, and
Oh,
start getting that stuff away from you. I went through my social media accounts and anything that was giving me fear mongering vibes, I unfollowed. Like all of the news stuff that was coming at me, I unfollowed a lot of that, and I went, you know what? If the world's on fire, someone will let me know. Like I'm just gonna during this timeline of me healing, like unfollow some of that stuff, and then also people who made me feel crazy. I stopped hanging out with them, and I started seeking out people that made me feel like I was, navigating this okay and that they were a trusted source of like support and help rather than those folks who were making me feel worse than I even was. So I would say the big one is seeking out help with a professional, getting some support from people, and then looking at what you're taking in and how it might be contributing to what's going on right now.
and I guess, in your case, being open to the possibility of medication, it's not that,
Yeah.
I know that's not people's first choice. It wouldn't be mine, but, we don't need to be martyrs. If there is something that's safe out there that your GP, your doctor thinks would be a good fit, obviously talk through the side effects. But, if all in all, that small dose of medication could really help you, then there's no shame in that. And so I'm
Yeah.
glad we've actually spoken about that too, because quite often there's
Yeah.
a real negative connotation when it comes to taking medication. And, for some people, it's just necessary. It may not be a long term thing, but certainly the fact that you've shared your story today, I think it just gets that stigma and throws it away, because there is no shame in seeking out help, and if that involves medication, then so be it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we talked about, there's different levels of this. Obviously, at the end of this podcast, I've described kind of a more intense postpartum anxiety experience, but we talked about anxiety is all over the place. We're all anxious. There's a lot going on in the world all of the time. And so, even with those ways to cope that we talked about just now, if you're noticing that you're gravitating towards news that's scaring the shit out of you, maybe looking at what you're following on social media, if you have an uncle that posts constantly fear mongering things on Facebook, maybe unfollow him for a bit. Take a look at how you are adding to it. Maybe you need to stop Googling. Maybe that's a thing that you need to do, like figuring out ways as an
Doom
anxious adult
scrolling.
that you
Yeah.
can kind of edit your behavior because you might not be at that state of where you need medication, but you might need ways to manage it. And so we'll provide some resources in our show notes for those who are struggling with anxiety. If you're someone who experienced postpartum anxiety, I think we will talk about this at a later time and dive deeper into it. But I would love to hear your experience and what helped you. Send us an email, DM, whatever you feel comfortable with. We want to hear from our audience and see if this is resonating with you guys. And that brings us to the end of another episode of the Momversation Club.
And if you've enjoyed today's show, which we really hope you have, then please don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a review, because your support helps us to reach even more mums and build a stronger village.
Until next time, bye for now.